And still nothing. Okay, there we go. Recording is on. So whenever you are ready.
You got everybody we need?
We have everybody we need. Now I will let you, oh, Victor is in here too, so we're good to go.
Okay, there's a guest available. Is that somebody that needs to get in?
Let's see. I don't see a guest available.
Okay.
Well,
Alrighty.
there's a guest that's currently in the meeting, right? There's 9 participants and one of them's a guest. So who is the guest?
9. So there should be Gary Heil, Victor Fosberg,
Yeah.
and Shaylin Rang as MOA staff. And for roll call, it'll be Sterling Strait, Troy Feller, and Scott Boney.
Yep.
And
We got
Nelson Franklin
David.
as the appellant.
We got David too, Tana,
Oh, and David Musick
for MOA staff.
for MOA staff.
So all players here?
Yes.
So who is the guest that's currently in the meeting?
Is that possibly Chaylin? Because he's sitting with Tana, so it may
That
be.
may be Shaylin.
It's
or
not,
myself.
and it shows up as Chaylin here. Is others invited but not attending? I guess, but they're on there. And the only one I see that says guest is next to Troy Feller. Actually says guest.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
Gary Heil, so it's all different.
On my, there's a guest that's currently in the meeting. Yeah, mine says Troy Feller guest, but there's a participant that's just labeled as guest on my list.
Huh.
Oh.
Do you see Chaylin? Do you see Chaylin in there at all? Or?
No, I don't see Chaylin. I see Tana, but I don't see Chaylin, so that must be Chaylin.
I think it is. Yeah.
I think so too. Okay. We had a little straw poll amongst ourselves, and I think I got
says
nominated.
Guest available, so maybe there's nobody there. I don't know.
Okay, so you said you were going to be chair, Scott?
I think that's the way the straw vote. Is that correct there, Troy and Sterling?
And we congratulate you on your election.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll call to order the meeting for BCA 012021, which is an appeal for an elevator clearance for the B Street South Alaska Credit USA Credit. Call to order on roll call.
Sterling Strait?
Present.
Troy Feller?
Here.
Scott Boney?
Here.
And for staff, Gary Heil?
Here.
Victor Fosberg?
I'm here.
Shaylin Rang?
Yes, I'm here.
And David Musick.
Good evening.
Okay, we have a quorum and all of staff is here.
Good. Do we have to approve the agenda, or is that
we do not have to approve the agenda.
Excuse me?
We don't have to approve the agenda.
Okay, I didn't think so, since that's the only reason we are really here. This is the appeal, as I mentioned, for case BCA-01-2021 regarding an elevator clearance for the Alaska USA Federal Credit Union on B Street, south elevator alterations. Appeal made by Franklin and Associates. And next thing we need to do is to swear all parties in who will be testifying. Correct?
Correct.
So, do you affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give in the matter before us is the truth? If so, answer yes.
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 Anybody else presenting from
David.
MOA? Or
David.
is it Phelan?
Possibly David, yeah.
David, you need to say yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Staff, can you outline the case under consideration, please?
Okay. There was a request for exception to an elevator code required clearance. There's a lot of clearances required for elevator equipment and for personnel that work on top of, underneath, and near elevator equipment. And a lot of the clearance requirements in the elevator codes over the years, they've changed. They've been modified, but they've been in our codes for many decades to provide for protection against pinching, shearing, crushing, and things like that for the personnel working about the equipment. So, can you all hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, yes.
I don't want to yell, but I don't want to be too quiet either here. So,
You're doing fine.
So in this particular case, a new elevator is being installed in a new elevator hoistway within an existing building. And in this industry, the elevator companies that install equipment, they have a drafting department, and they provide layout drawings for people to design and build to. On their layout drawings, and I know some of you already know this, but on their layout drawings, they show, for example, things like the loads imposed on building elements. And they show different dimensions and clearances that need to be adhered to. And then they have preparatory work by others, and they make sure that all those clearances are provided for and all the dimensions are in place prior to installing elevator equipment. It's a lot of upfront coordination by the companies with structural engineers, architects, general contractors, etc. So in this case, the overhead of the elevator, basically the ceiling of the elevator hoistway, ended up being lower than indicated on Otis's shop drawings, on their final layout drawings. And Otis is the elevator company in this case, installing the elevator. It's their equipment. On this particular model of elevator, and every model is different. Every model requires a variety of clearances above the elevator and near the elevator for safety. And this particular model of elevator has 2 hydraulic jacks. And the 2 hydraulic jacks are next to the elevator cab, and they rise above it. So the hoistway has a certain minimum height that it's allowed to be, and they have a hoisting beam up there for hoisting their equipment that's installed by the general contractor. And there's a certain height that that's supposed to be. And I don't know how much lower this hoistway is than Otis's drawings, but looking through the literature and the emails between Otis and people, the hoistway ended up being shorter than required on their layout drawings. So the appellant has asked for exception to the clearances. And in this case, above the hydraulic jacks, the worst point is about 1.25 inches of clearance when the elevator's at its extreme limit of travel. And an elevator's extreme limit of travel is a dimension. it's above the top landing a certain amount. Every elevator is different. And so when the elevator's at its extreme limit of travel, in this case, there's about 1.25 inches, and I think you all have seen the photograph I took, right? Have any of you not seen the photo with my tape measure? Okay, so you've all seen the picture. What's required there is a minimum of 4 inches in a certain area. The code asks for a certain area. So if the whole ceiling doesn't provide for the clearance, then a certain pocket needs to be provided above there. And our handbook to the elevator code explains where some of these dimensions came from when they created these clearance codes and what they say in the handbook. And we all know that handbooks aren't code, but sometimes they provide and elaborate on some code language. And so our handbook, even though not a code book, just says, hey, we came up with these clearances while studying anthropometric data of the human body. And anthropometric data is how we move, the dimensions our body takes up in space, things like that. So when elevator workers are on top of elevator cabs and they provide access to other trades on top of elevators, like fire alarm contractors, sheetrockers, electricians, sprinkler contractors, you name it, they bring other trades onto car tops a fair amount over the years as repairs are needed, as things are replaced and tested and looked at. And unsuspecting people can get crushed if the clearances aren't provided about the various equipment that we have on car tops. So as an example, like right now, my arm is on this copier. So if I'm on an elevator car top kneeling down and somebody were to run me up in the overhead and the right clearances weren't there, my arm would get crushed. My hand, my wrist, whatever. And that's part of what these clearances are there to protect against, is the crushing of our body parts due to intentional or unintentional motion of the elevator cab as it moves up, okay? So it's nothing new in the elevator industry. These, the hoistway dimensions are discussed up front with architects and with general contractors a lot before installing the equipment. And it's planned for. Now, when you install an elevator in an existing building, oftentimes the overhead structural elements need to be modified and then reinforced to continue to provide for structural requirements, snow load requirements, etc. I think you all saw pictures that I have of a variety of hoistways that had to be raised to provide for the required clearances for safety. Did any of you not see those photographs I provided? Okay. So it's very common in this industry. You look all around the world, you'll see little dog houses poked up above buildings to provide for not just equipment clearance, but primarily for the clearance for protection of elevator personnel. And oftentimes you don't need to see the little doghouse because structural elements can be modified, reinforced, and then provide for the required clearances. So the appellant, in seeking exception to these requirements, one thing I said in a conversation with the appellant is that these clearances are there for safety, and they're items that should be provided for and coordinated up front on a project. He indicated that there was a discrepancy between the elevator code and the building code, but the building code, and in this case it's the 2012 IBC, that's the applicable building code to this project, and the building code doesn't ask for or prescribe clearances for elevator equipment. The elevator code is where all of the different clearance requirements are prescribed. And there's a whole lot of clearances prescribed in the elevator code. So we didn't see where there was a discrepancy between the two codes. He indicated that to meet the 4-inch requirement, it was a practical difficulty because it was an existing building. But once again, that's always discussed and planned for with an architect and with the structural engineer of record to provide for the clearances. Done all over town, done regularly, and done for many, many decades to provide the clearances. So it's not an impediment, and it's something that should have been coordinated up front. He indicated that they provided for the clearances as required by Otis's drawings, but that's not true. Otis's layout drawings have a minimum overhead dimension, and that's not provided for on this project. And in the appeal letter, it has an elevation drawing of an elevator hoistway, but whatever hoistway that is not the hoistway on the elevator final layout drawings for this project either. So in a letter to the building official, the appellant said that it's a new code. So basically, the newer requirements are actually more lenient than prior elevator codes. The 2007 elevator code, of which the 2012 IBC refers to, that code book hasn't been adopted in Anchorage for a very long time. And if the appellant would like to build in accordance with that code and prior elevator codes for decades, they were more stringent. They required more clearances above these devices. The 2010 elevator code and later actually got more lenient. So, you know, one thing I'd like to point out is that even though the 2012 building code applicable to this project refers to the 07 elevator code, we have the 2016 elevator code adopted and effective in Anchorage and in the state of Alaska as well. So the 07 book referred to in the appellant's appeal has been gone for a long time and not adopted in Anchorage for quite some time. So again, the new code is more lenient. The appellant indicated that the reason for the clearance isn't apparent in the code, but the thing is, I told the appellant what the clearances were for, but then he wanted to do the appeal anyway, which I understand, but I just want everyone to know that. We discussed the reason. So the reason is for the safety of personnel. At the end of the appeal, there's a series of bulleted items, and the appellant indicated that the modification does not meet the intent of the 2012 IBC. But it needs to meet the elevator code. The IBC doesn't prescribe clearances. There's no conflict that we can see. So that doesn't appear to be present. The practical difficulties of providing for the required clearances for safety, that occurs when you install an elevator in an existing building, no matter what. And again, should be discussed and budgeted for and coordinated upfront on a project with the architect, structural engineer, general contractor, etc. And then the appellant indicated in the appeal that this area would only be accessed by trained personnel. Well, that doesn't make a difference. The clearances are provided for safety in the elevator code and have been for so long to protect the very trained people that are the ones getting hurt and killed. And it happens. They get hurt and killed up there because the required clearances aren't provided for. Especially if they assume that the clearances are provided for. It'd be a shame to get somebody up there and then have a crushing hazard because they figured that it was all built correctly to begin with. So even though they're trained personnel, they're the ones that get hurt and killed. So we need to provide the minimums for them so that they don't get hurt. And then there's a claim that the 4-inch clearance will damage structural elements and weaken the roof diaphragm. And that's always taken care of by the structural engineer of record to ensure that doesn't occur, to ensure the proper structural reinforcement is provided, designed, built, run through plan review and a structural inspector to make sure that it's good. So that's always done. And I showed you, I have a lot of pictures of hoistways where this kind of work's been done. I just provided you all a few pictures to look at just so you know that this is done on a regular basis. And then the appellants claim that we haven't lessened health or life just simply isn't true. These code requirements, these clearance requirements are there for the very reason of protecting our personnel. So to say that it doesn't lessen health or life, that's not accurate and should not be a consideration. And then, the biggest thing in considering appeals like this for exception to code requirements, especially when they're life safety requirements, is that the elevator inspection section in Anchorage, since around 1975, 76, we've had memorandums of understanding, written documents between us and the state of Alaska, whereby we inspect elevators and escalators and adopt and enforce the codes as stringent, but no less stringent than the state. We have a current MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. We need to adhere to that. We always have. And we renew those every several years with the state. And we make sure that we're keeping up and not being less strict than the state. So we're just simply not allowed to give exception to things that are less than what they would require and what they have adopted and effective. And we have in writing, and I gave you all a copy of the email where the state already let us know that they would not provide for a variance or an exception to these code requirements. And they always measure for them. They always look for them. They always require them as we look at new elevator installations. So the biggest thing is we just can't give exception to things less than what the state would allow either. And that's a pretty big point with us because we speak with and work with the state all the time for consistency. And these kind of clearance requirements to protect personnel are really a biggie in the industry. And if you all look at the layout drawings from Otis Elevator Company on the very first page in the top left, number 4 and 5, and if you'd like to see it, I can pull it up for you and let you all read it if you feel like you want to. Their layout.
Jim, let's not get too deep into this here that you've got time later to present your case. This is just kind of a presentation of the case, introduction, so to speak. So
Okay.
You may want to save that so we can kind of stay on task.
Yeah, we can show you that. And what that is just, it's a statement from Otis that says that the hoistway shall have the minimum dimensions shown on the layout drawings minus 0 inches. They don't want less than the minimum they show on the drawings. So just to let you know that if you need to see it later, I can pull that up and show you. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This time I'll open it up to Mr. Franklin to, as the appellant, it's your opportunity to present your case and just kind of remind you that it's the appellant's burden to provide, well, where did I see it? It was nicely worded in something that was sent to me. The burden of proof for our consideration. Mr. Franklin, floor is yours.
Thank you for that. Just to open up, I want to make it clear that I am doing this appeal on the behalf of the architect, Gord Thompson. The contractor is Cadence General, and the owner, of course, is Alaska USA. I did spend many years on the board, and so they authorized me to go ahead and take this on. So I filed this appeal on January 29th. If you want to go, I got quite a bit of material here, so I will try to go through it fairly quickly. I have 26 pages, and I'll just start with page 1. Here, this building is a concrete tilt-up building with the slab on grade. It's a 2-story building with wood diaphragm, second floor, and a wood diaphragm roof. It was designed by Design Plus, Don Dwiggins. It was built by Bach Construction in 1979. I assume that the structural engineer was Engineers Northwest, but I don't know that. We do have partial drawings for the original building. I have partial architectural, and I have partial shop drawings for the truss joist, but we couldn't locate any structural drawings. Again, the construction is tilt-up concrete walls, slab on grade. It has steel beams and steel columns. There's 2 interior bearing lines. There's steel beams and steel columns. They're open web truss joist. TJL joist is a 2x4 top and bottom cord with a metal web. So they are open joist. Think of them similar to a steel joist, except that it has wood top and bottom cords and wood plywood diaphragm. This type of building is notorious for having seismic problems. So therefore, I'm very reluctant to start cutting into the roof diaphragm. Typically what happens in an earthquake, these buildings will rip the ledgers off of the perimeter walls, off the concrete walls. And I think what's typical is the designers don't fully account for the weight of these walls. As far as I know, the ledgers on these walls, they appear to be a heavy angle with a wood plate bolted to the top, and then the joists are sitting on top of that. So Alaska USA purchased this building in 2007. They did a significant interior remodel, revised the mechanical, and did a re-roof at that time. The architect for that work was Gordon Thompson, and the contractor was Criterion General. In 2020, the owner decided to do a voluntary upgrade. They want to do a voluntary safety upgrade. They added heated sidewalks around the perimeter of the building. They've added an elevator, and they added upgraded the stairway to meet current code requirements. And we did coordinate with the elevator manufacturer. We had emails going back and forth, trying to make sure that we understood what the vertical clearance requirement was. And we understood that if we went ahead and designed the safety beam as being removable, that the 12-foot clearance requirement became the bottom of the sheetrock, and we met that requirement. So to give a timeline here on the project, we completed the design in August of 20. So it fell under the 2012 IBC. Application for a permit was in August of 20. Our final elevator submittal was 8/31 of 20. The structural permit, after going back and forth several times, the structural permit was approved in November 16th. And the elevator permit was approved on December 16th. So the construction, the contractor had gotten a jump on the construction. He was well into the construction before we got the elevator permit approved. And then on December 20th, I was informed by the contractor that after we had understood that we had the clearances we need, I was informed by the contractor that the inspector required the ceilings in the elevator shaft to be raised 4 inches. So I did apply to the building official for a modification, and a copy of that letter is in the file. And I applied for the appeal on, let's see, that was December 28th. I applied for the appeal a month later on January 21st. So if you go to page 2 of my submittal, that is the letter that I wrote to the building official, kind of outlining our position. If I could jump down to the code references, the building code is 2012 IBC, and the 2012 IBC adopts the 07 ASME code for elevators.
Are you referring to your letter dated December 28th?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I've got that as page 2 in my submittal. I'll refer to these pages at the top right-hand corner.
Ours aren't numbered, so if you give us by date, we can follow that a little easier.
Okay, I'll try to give you a little more description then. Second page of that letter.
Thank you.
The IBC talks about conflicts between the codes, and it appears to me that there's a conflict because we're under the 2012 code and it adopts the 07 ASME code, but then I was informed that we were under the 016 ASME code. That's just a complicating issue in my mind. Under the administration portion of the IBC, section 104.10, the building official is allowed to approve modifications where there are practical difficulties. And I want to keep emphasizing that. The ASME code requires these clearances, and the only thing they talk about in the ASME code is a shearing hazard. And certainly I've been up in this elevator. That I agree with the inspector. These are dangerous areas. You don't want people up in there. But I don't see where there's a shearing hazard. Certainly with the rollers, the rails and the rollers, anybody up there that had loose clothing on, or if you had a lanyard or you had a loose equipment hanging off you, they are dangerous areas, and so you don't want people up in there. If I bump down here to my bullet points, I would just want to emphasize a couple of them. I feel that this modification can be granted. The third bullet there, since this is an existing building, there are practical difficulties. The fifth bullet there, attempts to provide this 4-inch clearance will damage recently replaced and required structural reinforcements. The next bullet, attempts to provide 4-inch clearance will result in a weakened roof diaphragm. And the last bullet, modification does not lessen health, accessibility, or life for fire safety, because nobody would be up there when they're working on this elevator, when they're moving the elevator. And we have a letter to back up that opinion from Otis. My next page is a letter from Alaska USA. They have agreed with my position here to proceed with this appeal. My page 5 is a letter from Mr. Mike Liebing from Otis Elevator. He has an explanation here of how the elevator works. This is a relatively new type of an elevator. It's hydraulic, but the equipment required for the hydraulics is very minimized. There's no elevator room, equipment room. There's no large hydraulic tank or anything. The only thing, well, the second paragraph, sentence of this letter, it says, we understand that the minimum clear overhead requirement of 12 feet could not be obtained. That is not correct. It was obtained. But then he goes on to explain how this elevator works. And it turns out that you could not have a person up on top of the elevator who could raise it to the top. That person would have to be either in the elevator or in the corridor out in front of the elevator. I've got some background noise here. Let me see if I can get rid of that. Sorry about that. So my page 6 is a response letter that I got back from the building official, basically stating the position that you just heard. So I'm going to jump here to page 7. This is partial elevations of the original building that were designed by Don Dwiggins in 1978. You can see it's a concrete panel building, and it's got quite a bit of glass. Page 10 shows a roof plan. And the thing I wanted to note in this roof plan is that the roof drains are near the inside corners. On the sides, there's 4 roof drains. And that comes into play here in a little bit. The other random circles that you see in there are roof vents, which are no longer there. Those were removed when they did the re-roof. Page 11 is a partial section of the building, and it shows the second floor framing and the roof framing. It indicates that there's a concrete slab on top of the building supporting the mechanical unit. That slab is not there. My page 12 is showing a current aerial view of the roof. This is the page that I'm looking at here now. It's a current aerial view of the roof. And you can see the roof drains at those inside corners. That's a new mechanical unit that was put on there in 07. And this photo here is in the packet. The thing to note in that photo is in the back, you can see the roof drain clear in the back of the photo. And then this is looking east. So it's the right-hand end of this is the end where we put the elevator, and the rigid insulation and the roofing go right to the top of the parapet at the east wall. So we basically have no room to spare there. Next sheet just shows the curb that was placed. My sheet 15 just shows the construction. Shows the roof construction. This is where the mechanical unit is. So those are 20-inch TJLs at 2 feet on center. Next page is our new plan, our new lobby plan that shows the stairway. This is the east end of the building. It shows the stairway wrapping around the elevator shaft and the new lobby. This is the work that was completed in August of 20, the design. The next sheet is just a blow up of that same lobby. Shows the elevator shaft and the stairway wrapping around. The next sheet was my sheet 18. Shows the elevator, shows the architect's section of the elevator shaft, and you can see the safety beam at the top and the clearance at the bottom of the trusses. So the next page then is the Otis elevator shaft drawing. And the Otis elevator shaft drawing shows a 12-foot, at the second floor then, it's the 12-foot total clear height above the second floor. Now we had an understanding with Otis that if we designed the safety beam as removable, that 12 feet became the ceiling in the shaft. And we did meet that requirement. So, you know, there was significant coordination that went on, and all along we thought that we were in good shape. That particular drawing, it's accurate, except that when you look at this, well, you look at the rail that is right under the safety beam, then onto the left-hand side of that rail is a rectangle, a vertical rectangle there. That is the hydraulic cylinder goes up to the top of that rectangle and bears there, and that's what pushes the elevator up. It's called the top head, I believe is the terminology that they use. But in our case, that's really not quite to scale. That top head is, when the elevator is at the second floor, that top head is 4 inches, about 4 1/4 inches on one side of the shaft and 5 1/4 on the other side. So this was the shop drawing that was approved, and it was noted that we had, you see this box on the side was noted there by the owner. They checked it out and they said they had 12 feet and 1/2 inch. Go to my next page. That is the second floor framing plan for the elevator shaft. It shows the elevator supports on each side, the lateral support and the location of the rail. The next sheet is page 21. This is a photo of the roof framing after they opened up the ceiling to see what we had to deal with. You can see on each side there is the vertical support for the rail. And then on the left-hand side, you can see the vertical support lands between two trusses. On the right-hand side, it lands right at the truss. Okay, so my next sheet, 22, is my roof framing plan. The significant thing here is that the existing roof is, they're 20-foot span trusses. They are 16-inch TJLs, 2 feet on center. And again, one of them falls right on a truss, one of them falls halfway between trusses. This detail at the bottom of that sheet shows the detail that I started with for my elevator support, my lateral support for the elevator, plus I attached the safety beam to that. I had placed blocking at the bottom core of the trusses with some straps in there, and this blocking occurs real close to where we have some of the bridging for the original trusses. If you go back to that previous photo, you can see the bridging, line of bridging that ran through there. And that blocking in the photo, the blocking that's between the trusses, that was blocking that we were adding, trying to get a trial set of blocking in there to dump the lateral loads into the roof. So anyway, this detail here on the roof frame plan, that was the detail I started with. And again, we went back and forth with the structural plan reviewer, and after a lot of changes, we finally did get our permit. The next sheet here is page 23. This is the detail that I ended up with. That's the page you're looking at. This is the detail that I ended up with to satisfy the lateral load requirement for the rail. The reviewer wanted me to dump all the lateral loads in at the top, which I didn't agree with that. There's no way for that load to get up there. But we went ahead and put this extra bridging, top and bottom cord bridging and lateral bracing in there to support those loads. And then the reviewer required that we use deflection track at the shaft walls are metal stud. So the reviewer wanted me to use deflection track for the stud walls. So I said, okay, if I have to, so we did that. And then if we need deflection track for the stud walls, I would need to provide a deflection connector at the top of the rail support. So that's what this detail 7 shows how that was revised. Detail 8 is a blow up of that deflection connector at the top. And there you can see the extra bridging that we put in there. And then we figured out that one of the vertical supports landed right on a truss. So I had to modify the top connector. That's page 24. That's the modified top connector with the deflection deflection connection. Then this page 25 is just a picture of the connector that I had to use at the top. Page 26 is the same photo that you've already seen. I believe this was taken by the inspector. This photo here shows the 1 1/4 inch clear at the top of the at the top head And again, that occurs when the elevator is 3 inches above the second floor. So when it's at the second floor, we in fact do have the 4-inch clearance. We have 4 1/4 on one side, and I think we have like 5 1/2 on the other side. I have a whole bunch more photos here if we have any questions about what the actual conditions are. But I just want to reiterate, I'm very reluctant to start cutting holes in this roof because of the noted seismic problems with this type of a building. We proceeded with the understanding that we had met the requirements. And so to me, this 4-inch requirement that we're stuck with now is kind of a extraneous requirement. And I think there's other things that we could do probably before we start tearing into this roof. A couple of the things that we've discussed, we could paint the top of the top head. Discussion was to paint it yellow with black stripes to note it as a hazard, and then to post both sides of the elevator shaft, we could post a warning on there saying hazard, do not touch the top head. Another suggestion was to place a net hanging down from the ceiling that would kind of, when the elevator went up, it would incorporate this so that if somebody did have a hand up there, they would feel the net and pull their hand away. So I just think there's other ways around this. This certainly by code is within the building department's purview to allow this modification. And so that being said, I will turn it back.
I'm writing. Questions for Mr. Franklin before we move on?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Sterling. Mr. Strait,
Yes,
excuse me. Yeah. Go ahead.
Mr. Franklin, in your letter, you state that a conflict exists between the 2012 IBC and the current ASME elevator standards. What you have not clarified is what that conflict is. Can you please expand on that?
Well, the main conflict is that the 2012 IBC adopts the 07 ASME standards, but somehow the city just automatically adopts a new elevator code, but that code should be under the IBC. So I don't understand how they can continually just adopt a new code. Adopt a new elevator standard when the standard is dictated by the IBC. Now, I'm not that familiar with either one of those standards, so it just looks to me like there's a conflict there. The state dictates, evidently, according to the inspector, the state dictates that you use the latest ASME standard, but that's not what the code says. I don't see how they can just arbitrarily adopt the latest standard. The standard is dictated by the IBC.
Okay. So as a follow-up question to that, if I see where you're coming from, if we're using the 2012 IBC, which adopted I believe you said the 2007 version of the ASME, are you aware if this 4-inch requirement exists in the 2007 version of the ASME that was in effect when the project was brought
well, according to the inspector, under that code, it's a 6-inch requirement, but I don't know that. I've never seen that in writing, and I don't know that. It's kind of a side point, the conflict. Having spent many years on the board and having spent many years going to these code meetings, it seems like you're circumventing the code by just automatically adopting the latest ASME. The code dictates which ASME you use, and the city adopts the code, and we have all these meetings set up to adopt the code, and then for some reason the state comes in and just dictates, no, you have to use a later code. Well, we don't follow the state, we follow the city.
Yeah.
The city adopts the code.
Scott, could you clarify that, please?
I believe that the newer code was brought before the assembly. It went through review, brought before the assembly. The assembly did bring that into local amendments. So I believe that the elevator has caught up to the code a little better than the building department has with the IBC.
Okay, Mr. Chair, may I clarify Mr. Franklin's concern?
If you can do that during part of your presentation, please. I thought you were asking for mine in there. I got a question there for you.
Just to back up a second, this conflict, to me, I see a conflict there because a lot of times the state will adopt the IBC before the city does, or the city might adopt it before the state does. But we go by what the city does, not what the state does.
Right.
But it's kind of a side issue. I don't think that's the main issue here.
Your last photograph on 26 of 26 there, that beam that's shown there is the temporary beam that will be ultimately removed, as I understand it?
That's correct. That's the safety beam. And with that beam removed, the lowest level of the ceiling is 12 feet 0.5 inches.
Okay. Now that small square that's just to the left of the 12-inch clear dimension, that is the top head of the hoist, as I understand it?
The dark piece, that square was added in there by the contractor, I think, and just ignore that. The dimensioning that's in there, just ignore that.
Right.
The top head is the top of the dark shaft that's going up just below the ceiling. And if you look at the inset photo
It
here,
looks like there's a white sticker on it.
yeah, exactly.
That's the
If you
top
look at
head.
the inset here, the 1.25 inches is shown right there from the ceiling down to the top of the top head.
Okay.
Now, I would like to stress that this 1.25 inches is when the floor of the elevator is actually 3 inches above the second floor. When the floor of the elevator is at the second floor, then that dimension becomes 5.25 inches. I'm sorry, 4.25 inches, because the highest run of the elevator is 3 inches above the floor. I'm not sure why that is. I'm curious to why they do that, because you want the elevator to be at the second floor. But for some reason, they require that you be able to go 3 more inches.
And in your presentation, you mentioned that a person operate the elevator cab while being on top, they'd have to be off the cab in order to run it that high. Did I understand that right?
That's based on the letter from Mike Liebing from Otis. He indicated that you couldn't be on top of the elevator. You have to be, to operate that, you have to be either in the elevator or out in the corridor. That's in his letter.
That is. All operations where the car is to be driven past the top terminal unit and onto the stop ring must be conducted from the controller outside of the hoistway using a mechanic service tool, which would only be used by a qualified elevator mechanic. Okay, do you, and maybe Chalen's got to address this one, can you explain the limit magnet?
You want me to, Scott?
Maybe you need to, Chalen, yes.
Okay. It's called a platen plate. It's the large black steel. And the measurement is 1.25 inches from the black steel to the ceiling. There's no white sticker. That's just the top of the hydraulic jack. Where the hydraulic jack fastens to the left and right of the car is called the platen plate. So
There is a white sticker on that shaft. It shows up in the other photo.
oh, okay.
That's what Scott was talking about.
Oh, it must be a picture I wasn't looking
Now,
at. So
and that element that you just showed us there in the dark, that dark element, that goes up and down with the car. That is attached to the car.
yeah, the hydraulic jacks are to the left and right of the cab, just like a bottle jack that you change a tire with on your car, just like that, just gigantic. And they're hidden, and they go way above the cab, and they press the cab up, and then the hydraulic fluid goes back into the holding tank with gravity, and the car comes down. So my arms are simulating the big hydraulic jacks, okay?
Right.
Okay.
Now,
the top of those hydraulic jacks are called a platen plate, and those are what, when the elevator's at its extreme limit of travel, those are what get 1.25 inches to the ceiling of the hoistway, is the top of those 2 hydraulic jacks.
And
So
that is when the floor of the elevator is 3 inches above the second floor.
that's correct, yeah. So when the elevator,
What is the purpose of that requirement?
that the elevator travel beyond the landing?
Yes.
Okay, so elevators have what's called run by or over travel, top and bottom. And they need to have that so that if your normal slowdown and your normal stopping means fails, software, wiring, limit switches that are physical, magnets that slow you and stop you, as the car approaches the terminals, the top and bottom terminals, then the car travels beyond its normal level of stopping, which is the landings where it's level, and it would trip redundant switches, auxiliary switches that would stop you from going to the floor, like the pit floor, or would stop you from smashing into the roof. So they have other means of stopping the car beyond the landing, and the elevator has to be able to get to those things. It needs to be able to, if its normal stopping means and slowdown means fails, it needs to be able to get to those auxiliary stopping means, okay? So we call that a run by. And as every type of elevator has a certain minimum run by. This elevator is a 100-foot-a-minute elevator. So its minimum top run by is 3 inches, and its minimum bottom run by is 3 inches. The elevator must travel that far beyond the terminals in order to trip the auxiliary switches, and in order to, at the bottom, touch the buffers, and at the top to touch what's called stop rings. That keeps the hydraulic plungers from jumping out of the jack, stop rings. That's its extreme limit of travel. All the clearances in the elevator code are written not with reference to the elevator sitting level at the top landing, but with reference to the elevator's extreme limit of travel, top and bottom, because personnel, they jump things out, they remove magnets, they remove switches, they move each other around when they do tests, inspections, maintenance, repair, and replacements, and modernizations. All these different tasks, they move each other around. Sometimes they're together, sometimes they're separate. Sometimes there's a person at the landing running somebody up on top of an elevator or running an elevator down on top of somebody. Their assumption is all the required clearances are provided for them. So, you know, when you talk about, the clearances are there when the elevator's at the top landing. The code doesn't, that's not where the clearances are required. The clearances are required when the elevator's at its extreme limit of travel, which is up on the stop rings up there. So, and again, if somebody's at the landing running me up and I'm on top of an elevator, or some other company maintains the elevator, see, these elevator companies, they lose service to each other a lot. And let's say ThyssenKrupp Elevator or Schindler or Arctic Elevator Company gets this elevator on service, and they assume that Otis and everyone built the shaft right. When they run each other up and down, if their hand happened to be on that platen plate, they would get crushed. The 4 inches is what ASME, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, they're the ones that publish our codes. When ASME studied the human body and what we need for clearances, they knew that somebody might rest their hand there and get crushed. All those pictures I gave you all from the code book that show all the car top clearances, and there's a lot of photographs or pictures I gave you from the code book. Look at the time ASME put in to the requirements of elevators, required clearances. They put a lot of time into not just writing it in the code book, but drawing pictures for you to refer to get the clearances right so people don't get hurt. And it's about the elevators at their extreme limit of travel, not sitting level at a floor. And it's when people do testing, inspection, maintenance, repair, when they get hurt, killed. So.
I got more questions, but I'll defer until after Chalin makes his presentation because they're directed to him. Any more questions for Mr. Franklin before we move to Chalin's presentation?
Yeah, I have another question.
Sterling, yes.
Mr. Franklin, if this issue had come to light in the design phase of the project before any hammers had been swung, do you feel you would still be making this appeal, or would you have addressed this through other means?
I think I would have tried to kill the project because I'm not going to cut a hole in that roof, knowing what type of building that is. It's possible we could. Well, you saw that the trusses are 20 foot long. We could go in there and pull up 5 or 6 trusses and reframe that probably with LVLs or something stronger, and then get the deck back down where it is. But then how do I rebuild all that bracing and bridging and bracing back in there? I'm not sure I know how to do it. I'd either have to do that, or I'd have to take that one connector that you saw there and try to extend the legs 4 inches. It just seems like a tremendous effort for not very much gain. You know, is there another kind of an elevator we could have used? I don't know. This elevator has pretty minimal requirements as far as space. So I don't know. At that point, I think we might have been better off to abandon the project.
Through the chair, I have a question.
Mr. Feller.
Mr. Franklin, going back to page 19 of your information, the elevator shop drawing.
The picture of the elevator shaft?
Yes. I want to make sure I understand your line of reasoning as you design this project. And I think you explained it, but I want to make sure I understand it. So this shop drawing shows 12-foot total clearance height. And the top of that dimension is to the bottom of the hoist beam.
That's right.
Safety beam, correct?
That's right.
So what I heard you say is that, so you looked at that and said, okay, well, if we can make that safety beam removable, then that 12-foot total can be to the top of the shaft. And then the owner verified that the top of that shaft was greater than 12 foot. With the note off to the right, it says 12 foot, 1.5. So at that point, you thought you had done your due diligence, and yes, we have adequate clearance.
Well, that's mostly correct, but actually I was not the one that decided that. It was a series of emails that went back and forth between the owner and Otis. And Otis indicated that if the safety beam is removable, that the 12-foot becomes the ceiling height.
Okay, so that was between owner and Otis.
Yes.
But you were aware of that correspondence and
Yes,
bought into the reasoning. Okay.
That's correct. Now, I understand that there's another drawing somewhere. I have not seen I don't know if that's a revised elevator drawing. I'm not sure what you're looking at. I've never seen that. This was the elevator submittal that I saw. And so
Through the
that's what we
chair.
went with.
Through the chair, may I show you the picture?
Yes, please. Is that in your packet, Jalen?
I refer to it in the response to the appellant. Where it indicates that the layout drawings are different than what we reviewed in plan review. The sectional drawing that you all just that you just referred to, Mr. Feller, this is the final layout drawing. It says final layouts right there. From Otis Elevator, from their factory. And then what this shows in the sectional view is 12 foot 3 inches to the bottom of the hoist beam. And then the ceiling of the hoistway is well above that. I don't know if you can see the 12.3 or not. So 12.3 to the bottom of the hoist beam, plus a great deal of distance above that to the sheetrock, would have been more than code compliant. That's what we reviewed in plan review. That's not what is on the job. And that's also different than the elevation that you put in your appeal. I'm not sure what drawing Otis gave you. It certainly is different than these final layouts that they provided to us for plan review. This is much greater.
Okay, well, this was my question and you interjected. So since you interjected, let me ask you a question, Jalen. You said this was the information that you reviewed during the plan review and then you issued the permit. Is
Yeah,
that
actually,
correct?
it was Bryce, one of my partners.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, I've never seen that drawing. And I'd be surprised if that was the submittal drawing. I'm not arguing that it maybe wasn't the final layout drawing, but I suspect that my understanding, the submittal drawing was the drawing that I have. And our understanding was that the 12 feet could be the bottom of the ceiling if the safety beam was removable.
Any other questions for Mr. Franklin?
I've got one more.
Mr. Straight?
Through this discussion, it sounds like there's perhaps a point of confusion between what's been received provided by Otis, the elevator vendor, and various parties. Has Otis been part of this appeal preparation process? Why are they not here making this appeal, and why are you here on behalf of them?
Well, I'm here on behalf of the owner, but I was not aware of that drawing. In fact, could you tell us what the dates are on that drawing?
Yes. October 1st, 2020. Final layouts, October 1st.
Well, our final elevator submittal was dated August 31. And okay, the final elevator permit was approved on December 16th. So we were not aware of that drawing. That's about all I can say about it.
No further questions.
Ready to move on to Jalen's presentation?
Okay, and I apologize, having, not doing this very often. I kind of gave you my presentation at the beginning. So I didn't realize the beginning was supposed to be just kind of a snapshot and then expand on it later. So, most of what I had followed the response to the appeal that you all have a copy of. So I'll just add a couple quick things then. I just want to make it clear, Mr. Franklin, that we don't arbitrarily adopt elevator codes. We have elevator code review committees and have for decades. And so every new code book that's published, a code review committee is formed. And it includes architects, engineers, elevator contractors, fire department, the state of Alaska elevator inspectors, and the city of Anchorage elevator inspectors. And then we review those books and move forward with adoption on those books, like any other code review committee, like the IBC, IFC, NEC, etc. So when the building code, when the IBC is adopted, and it does have references to many code books in I think it's chapter 35, it references many code books, but jurisdictions adopt books on the timelines with which they adopt the books, not necessarily because the IBC references them. As an example, the IBC references a version of the electric code, but in Anchorage, the 2017 electric code is adopted outside of whatever the IBC references. So I just want you to know that nothing is arbitrary. A matter of fact, Scott is the chair of our elevator code review committee. It has been the last, I think the 2010 and the 2016 elevator codes, both of which were reviewed and adopted way after the 07 elevator code. So we have, very concise and follow all the rules of any other code adoption. And nothing is arbitrary, and it's all run through the building, the building board, legal, and the assembly for adoption. So I just want you to be comfortable with that. And like the 2019 elevator code is currently published, we're about to formulate a code review committee for that and review it for adoption as well. So, and let's just say that we did hold this project to the 07 elevator code. Like I mentioned early on, the 07 elevator code requires more clearances above a variety of equipment up there. When you all look at those pictures from the code book of car top clearances, some of those are greater requirements in the 07 code book. The newer code books are more lenient. So it wouldn't serve this building's structure, certainly wouldn't serve this building structure any better to use an older code, of which we couldn't anyway. I really want to reinforce that people in the elevator industry who work on the equipment assume that all the clearances are provided for, and there's an awful lot of our codes written for the protection of elevator personnel. A lot of the codes are written for the riding public, but a lot of our codes are written for elevator personnel too, for protection in pits, machine rooms, and tops of elevator cabs, of which they hang out all the time. That's kind of their office. It's where they do a lot of their work. And a lot of the elevator companies take each other's equipment on service. And they're not, a lot of them aren't very familiar with their competitors' equipment. And they do run each other up and down, whether they should or not, or whether the company tells them they're allowed to or not, they do. And so if you were to hear something from Mike Liebing that said, well, they're not supposed to do that, well, but they do. And there's no little limits, magnets, whatever, that are put in there as an alternative to the clearances. The code has required clearances for a very, very long time and still does. And, there's not an alternative to that. And if you did some research online a bit, you'd find there's a lot of elevator personnel are hurt and killed by equipment on top of elevators and at the bottom of elevators, both on car tops and pits. Underneath and on top elevators are pretty bad hazard areas for the personnel, and they do get hurt and killed. So I just really want to reinforce that the clearances should be provided for. I gave you all pictures of where hoistways were bumped up a bit to provide for these clearances. That's done all the time in this industry. And we tell architects all the time when asked to prepare for that. Nobody called us on this project till it was built. And none of us who do elevator inspections have gone and done an inspection on this elevator. Somebody called and just said, hey, will you come take a look at this? It looks like an issue. So it was a free drive-by to stop, measure, and say, yes, it's a code issue. And then I just distributed the code requirements to everybody so they could prepare for finding a solution. Because somebody cared enough to say, hey, this is an issue, come by, please. And we do that. We do that because it helps solve a problem before someone calls for inspection. So Anyway, yeah, look at all those pictures from the code of the clearances up there. There's a lot that ASME wants for clearances, and we measure a lot of different things when we build elevators, when we inspect elevators, and there's a lot of things to measure to make sure that it's all provided for, so we don't get everything crushed. So I think that's it for now.
Question for
Couple issues. Could I respond to some of those issues?
you do get a moment to reboot his presentation at the end. Right now, it's an opportunity for the board members to ask questions of Shailen. Questions?
I do
can
have
start out with
one question.
and
I
that's-
want to make sure I understand. So this clearance issue, it sounds like it's only on one side of the elevator shaft and not the other because of the sloping roof. Is that true or not? It's on both sides?
It's both sides, yes.
Okay.
It's on both sides when the elevator is 3 inches above the second floor. When the elevator's at the second floor, we meet the clearance requirement.
Well, no, the clearance requirement is not met because the clearance has nothing to do with the elevator being level at the floor. That's not how the clearances are prescribed.
Let me restate that. When the elevator floor is at the second floor, we have more than the 4-inch clearance above the head.
But that's not where ASME prescribes the codes to be provided for, though.
Well, let's move on from that one. Can I go back to your photo 1, please? And that's where you've got the tape on there that shows 1.25 inches to, what did you call that piece? The
platen plate.
The platen plate. Is that basically, is that the whole unit, or is there actually a tube behind it that platen plate is riding on?
No, that's the top of the platen plate. If you were to look at it in a plan view, would be about that big. Okay, it's probably about 8 inches by 8 inches or something like that. Directly underneath it, Scott, because it's flat. Directly underneath it is the big hydraulic jack. So the shiny plunger that comes out of a bottle jack when you change a car tire, that shiny plunger that looks all shiny and silver, that's what's directly below that platen plate.
So there's nothing behind that platen plate. There's another item there that's going to keep hands or arms from getting into this dangerous situation potentially.
No, this is all a vertical crush issue. There's nothing behind it.
That black member is actually a 3-sided bent plate, and it's open on the backside. So if you look around behind it, you can actually see the hydraulic cylinder in there.
I'm gathering
and
that.
then the
yes.
top of that, you call it the platen plate?
Yeah, the hydraulic plunger fastens to the black plate, and then where it fastens is called the platen plate.
The terminology that I heard used in the field was the top head. Is that the same thing? Or are you familiar with that?
I'm not sure what Otis, if somebody from Otis said that or not, but yeah, there's kind of a top view looking at it. Yeah, you can see the bolt right there. That bolt is what fastens the hydraulic jack to the platen plate. There's a big bolt hidden inside there.
And that's 14 to 14.
And that is 3-sided, and that the cylinder is in behind there, and you can, if you poke your head around there, you can see the cylinder. And in that photo, you see the white tag that Scott was talking about. Just so that's the white tag. See that?
So it must be on the other side because it didn't show up on the Muni pictures.
I have that picture.
Not in its presentation.
Oh, I don't have that picture.
No,
That's why.
that's an extra picture that I have that I did not submit.
Okay.
I have a whole series of pictures. I could show them to you, but it gets kind of voluminous after a while.
Yes.
So as I understand it, this 4-inch clearance is regarding protection for more than likely crushing of either an arm or a hand being on top of the platen plate when it gets into this overrun scenario.
Yes.
When you read the ASME code, it talks about shearing. It doesn't talk about pinching or crushing. It
Well, that
just
is what-
talks about shearing.
Go ahead, Shaylin.
That as well. It's crushing and shearing issues that are accounted for up there. All the above, because sometimes we have light fixtures, smoke detectors, J boxes, conduits, piping, wiring, beams, structural elements, machines. In this case, there's just a hoist beam and a ceiling. But so that it's a combination of crushing and shearing prevention that all of these different clearances protect against. Yeah. So shearing is one of the things measured for, and then crushing. In this case, it's just a crushing issue.
Is there any precedence for some kind of a warning around it? For instance, he said putting a, like a, pardon me, maybe a coil chain curtain around it to give additional warning. And, that could theoretically hang down some significant distance to provide additional warning that there's a danger ahead. Has that ever been done?
For other types of low clearances, yeah, but this one is a total crushing issue. Some other clearances, as an example, there's a refuge space clearance on top of the elevator of 43 inches. That way, if it does end up there, you can kneel down, and 43 inches gives you what's called a refuge space.
Yep.
Sometimes when that's less than the minimum 43, chains have been done as a warning all along an area. But this one is a total crushing issue. I mean, it's just 1.25 inches. So the answer is no.
And to back that up, the height of that shaft that sticks up above the top of the elevator, the hydraulic protection,
Yes.
that is exactly 43 inches tall. So we actually have in excess of 43 inches up there.
Yeah, that's
So-
normal.
If there was something that did hang down around this head, let's call it the piston head, it would not interfere with the operation of the elevator itself, that there's plenty of distance clearance there that could hang and not affect the operation.
Yeah, as long as it didn't contact anything.
And that's kind of what we had discussed, putting some kind of a net that was maybe tubular shaped, that when the elevator came up, it went, this platen plate went up into that tube. So if somebody was touching it, they would realize, if there was a hazard there. And that could be yellow or international orange or.
Yeah,
I
I'm
think
really
there's
concerned
something we
about
can do
putting
there.
something rigid around it, but if there was something flexible around it that had significant
yeah.
distance, I'd be.
It has to
Yeah,
be like a
that-
net. It has to be
Yeah,
flexible
that's
like a
why
net.
I said like a coiled wire fabric is one that come to mind, that has the ability of kind of collapsing a little bit and giving you plenty of warning to get your fingers out of the way and your arm out of the way.
Well,
Go ahead.
in elevator hoistways, you know how everything has to be constructed of either fireproof or limited combustible materials. So usually things like that would be chains or something metal that isn't combustible or likely to be able to burn up and disappear.
Yeah, this is actually wire, so it's
Oh.
called fabric, but it's all wire.
Oh, okay.
But I'm getting into solutions, and I'm not supposed to do that. I'm just brainstorming here because I want to make sure I understand all parameters here. Any other questions for the municipality before we allow?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Who is that, Mr. Straight?
Yep. Through the chair, the first question I have involves the code adoption. So as an engineer, I'm used to going to the IBC and then looking at the codes that the IBC refers and using those, as Mr. Franken has pointed out. Is there a specific local amendment that replaces the version of the ASME with the newer version when you go through that process? Is that independent of the IBC adoption, or does it happen at the same time?
Yeah, like May 21st, 2019, the Anchorage Assembly adopted the newest elevator code reviewed by committee and the latest electric code reviewed by their committee simultaneously. So they were off cycle with the building code, which just got adopted October 27th, as an example. So yeah, they're always off cycle. Yeah, the committees
And that would be in conflict with the IBC. That was kind of my.
Yeah, it's not a conflict. It's just that you can't assume that what the IBC references is automatically the adopted code in the city you live in. I mean, every city and state are different and have committees that review the codes for adoption. And some cities and states.
The IBC says you can assume that. That's the conflict
So
that I.
To clarify, when this project was permitted, which, if I understood right, was in August of 2020, which version of ASME was in effect through local amendment at that point?
The 2016 elevator code.
Okay, and that is the version that you had included excerpts of in our packet. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so the other question I have, this specific clearance issue sounds like a very specific case. Do you have other issues with clearance above these hydraulic jacks? Is this a common issue? Is this something that often gets missed? Is this something that's not normally an issue? How prevalent is this?
It's not very prevalent at all. Mostly the required clearances are met and accounted for by the architect and the structural engineer of record. And the electrical engineer as well, because there's a lot going on up there sometimes, depending on the model of elevator. So they all have to coordinate and talk about the minimum clearances to everything. Smoke detectors, light fixtures, machines, ceilings, hoist beams, you name it. So it's very, very rarely a problem with hydraulic elevators especially. It's more a problem with the traction elevators occasionally. Something might need to be moved with traction equipment. Hydraulic elevators, it's hardly ever a problem.
And in your experience, how familiar are the vendors, the elevator vendors themselves, with these clearance requirements?
Very. Their layout drawings, they coordinate with everybody per their layout drawings, which have the minimum clearances. And then right on the front page, it says, don't give us less than what we drew. We'd like numbers 4 and 5. Right on the front page of the preparatory work by others, it says right there in 4 and 5, don't give us less than what we drew.
Okay, and on that document that you're referencing, which I believe you said was dated in October of 2020 as a final submittal, does that specifically call out this 4-inch clearance?
No, it doesn't. It asks for, they never do that. They just ask for minimum clearances, and then they know that all of the variety of clearances, top, bottom, horizontal, of which there are many, are met. They don't confuse it by writing down a ton of them all over. They just put down dimensions of the, in plan view and in a section to know that everything is met for code compliance.
Okay. Thank you.
So as I understand this, you have to have a little pocket no less than 14-inch diameter. Is that what I understand there around this head as clearance?
In our response to the appeal, if you go to the fourth page, which at the bottom says 143, that's from the code book.
143?
Yeah. Got some highlighted text.
Okay.
Okay. So that's page 143 from the 2016 elevator code. So section 3.4.8 is for hydraulic elevator clearance. That's one of many clearances referred to, just one of many. And that tells you what the requirements are above the jacks. And then 3 pages after that is a visual.
What I'm seeing here is this talks about additionally a center clearance of the direction of the center line of the car top at least 12 inches shall be provided from the top of the hydraulic jack to any object creating a shearing hazard.
Yeah, so let's say they
So-
constructed a pocket up into the sheetrock. Let's say they left most of the ceiling where it is, which is good. It's fine. It's low, but it works. Let's say they just wanted to make a pocket above the jacks. What that's telling you is make a pocket equal to the platen plate up into the sheetrock and over toward the center line of the car by X amount. That way, if your hand and arm are up like this, you don't get crushed. You've got a little pocket of space, a little rectangle of space as a minimum, so that you don't get crushed.
And what is the width requirement for that?
The width of the platen plate. The code doesn't say, so basically it's the width of the object.
So you're really not concerned about an arm laying across the platen plate and being, so to speak. It's not this action that you're concerned about then.
It's like this.
Yeah.
Sideways see it. It's interesting how ASME wrote it. They wrote a very interesting little pocket. But
Because
yes,
what I was trying to understand is how that works with a couple pages later. They're on page 341, and specifically 342. I guess that's a markings required.
oh, that's just markings when certain objects infringe on, are less than a certain dimension, then you mark it with red and white tape. Yeah, that's just part of the code too.
So when does that come in?
When certain clearances are less than a certain amount. And it doesn't mean that there's a code violation. It just means that when there's certain clearances that they want it marked.
But that's not applicable in this case?
No. And actually that requirement, Scott, with that red and white tape, to be honest with you, the times that occurs where that red and white reference is brought in, I can't even tell you a single elevator that's been done up here.
Okay.
Because it's so rare, because usually people just simply get the clearances. And so the elevator folks, honestly, if you put down red and white tape somewhere, they wouldn't be able to tell you why that's there, because they don't use it or mark it, because that particular reference just isn't. It hasn't occurred in Anchorage. It might in Chicago, LA, where we do thousands and thousands of elevators. But yeah, I can't even tell you one time they've ended up using that code reference and having to do that. We have 1,400 elevators in Anchorage, and I can't tell you a single one that has that.
Anything else for the Muni?
I'm mute, Troy.
Did you have something? Troy, you're muted.
Yeah, I do have a question. So Shaylin, how long have you been in the elevator business or inspection business?
I've been in the industry since 1998. I've been an inspector with the municipality for 16 and a half years.
Okay. And in that amount of time in the municipality, how many, in terms of this type of, crushing or inspectors or personnel riding on the top of elevators, how many people have been injured in the municipality, just approximately?
Due to crushing issues?
Well, like safety issues, whether it be crushing or shearing with, riding on, qualified personnel riding on top of an elevator. I'm just trying to get an idea as like, how big of a problem is this? How often are people injured? So in your 16 years in the municipality, approximately how many people have been injured that you know of?
Let me think. I know of one. It's not common.
Okay. I mean, obviously you want it never to happen, in an ideal world, but if, 1 in 16 years, that gives me a good idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from Uni? Hearing none, I'll give you some time, Mr. Franklin, to rebut.
Thank you. Just to back up a little bit, page 143, the reference that he had to the clearances above hydraulic jack projecting above the car. That paragraph, I've read that paragraph a dozen times, and the more I read it, the more confused I get. It's like something that was written by committee. It keeps talking about the horizontal plane and the horizontal connection. So my comment, I guess, is whoever drew the drawing on page 433 probably never read that paragraph, because it makes no sense to me. So to move on, the background letter that was provided talks about crushing, pinching, and shearing. That paragraph right there talks about shearing. It doesn't talk about crushing or pinching. But I fully agree that anytime you're in an elevator shaft, it's an extremely dangerous place. I've been in several, and I don't go in there unless the elevator manufacturer's representative is there to operate the system. This elevator, when you're up on top of this elevator, the rollers are exposed, the rail's exposed. Anytime that elevator is moving, I could see somebody getting caught up in those rollers or in the rail system. They would be, to me, a lot more dangerous than having a chance of getting your hand pinched if you're headed on top of the top, what we were calling the top head. I would like to go back to these photos that were provided of buildings where they popped the roof up to provide clearance for the shaft. I'm looking at photo 2. Not sure if that's the first one. Anyway, photo 2. That building is the Red Roof Inn on Carlock Manor. Was taken over by the city, and I assume that elevator was added after the fact. That's a 3-story wood frame building. That roof is going to be either 2-by framing or manufactured wood trusses. Whenever they cut that hole in the roof to add that shaft, they would have had to modify the trusses, and they would be bearing on the shaft walls. So those shaft walls would have become bearing walls. And that's typical of all of these photos. Because of the system that we have in our building, I can't use those walls as bearing walls. So that's the Red Roof Inn. The second photo here is photo 3. This is what I call the coffee building. It used to be owned by Dan Coffee. It's near Sorrento's on Northern Lights. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that building. It's on the north side of Northern Lights. I have been in that building. The roof framing in there is kind of a mess, but it's 2-by framing. To cut this shaft in there, you would have had to use the shaft walls as bearing walls. This photo 4, I'm not familiar with this building. It looks like it has a flat roof, so I'm thinking it's the same thing. You would have had to create bearing walls for shaft walls. Photo 5. That's Admiral's Cove. It's a series of condo buildings that are out off of DeBar, going towards Muldoon on the north-hand side. There's probably 5 or 6 buildings in there. They're all the same. They have manufactured roof trusses, and these elevators were part of the original design. They were put in the original construction. And one thing to note on this one is the vents on the side of the pop-up there. One of the reasons that these things all get popped up is because they used to require a lot of ventilation in the elevator shaft. And my understanding that's not required anymore. Not sure what the reasoning behind that was. So I guess just to close, I would like to reiterate some of the bullet items I had on the last page of my letter. This is an existing building. There are practical difficulties in trying to meet this 4-inch clearance. Attempts to meet this clearance are going to affect the roof diaphragms in a building that I'm not confident of to start with. And I just am fairly adamant. I don't see how this modification would lessen the health, accessibility, or life safety of the building. I think it's entirely within the purview of the building official to allow this modification. And by extension, the building board. There are other things that we can do. We can paint the top head yellow with black stripes to note it as a hazard. We can put up a hazard sign, and we could possibly come up with some type of a flexible net that would come down, and so a person that had his hand up there would be warned that there was a potential hazard. And again, I think this would be a minor hazard compared to the other hazards in that elevator shaft. So with that, I will close.
I have a couple questions, if I may. If we can look at page 21 of your packet, that's the photo looking at the shaft with the ceiling off.
It looks like I've shuffled too many times.
I got to turn the background off so you can see it.
Okay, page 21. That picture is looking up at the bottom chords of the 16-inch TJL trusses.
Right.
And
the two vertical elements on the sides there are the rail supports.
That's correct.
Where is the top head in relationship to the rail support?
Well, you can see that the it's not symmetric. The rail supports are off to one side. So the top head would be, well, if I'm holding the photo this way, the rail supports are closer to the top side of that photo. And the top head would be to the bottom side, and just adjacent to those rail supports. So for me to cut up into that roof, I would have to cut out my blocking, which again would cut out some of my bracing. And on the left-hand side of that photo, to provide the 12-inch clearance in the front, I would have to cut the bottom cord of that joist. So at that point, you know, I'm thinking that if I had to do this, I would just pull those trusses and reframe that roof with LVLs. I could get the diaphragm back together then, but that opens a whole nother set of problems. How do I get my bridging and bracing back in there?
Yeah,
So it's complicated.
where I'm
and
coming from
very expensive for what
I'm
we're going to gain.
that there's a way of doing this without disturbing the plywood deck, which is, whoops, system of yours.
I only caught part of that. Can you repeat that?
I wasn't sure if mine was going nuts or whose. I'm convinced that we can come up with some kind of a solution that does not destroy the integrity of the plywood deck.
Well, I could reframe that. You'd have to pull it up from the top, pull the roofing, pull the insulation, pull the deck, reframe that 20-foot span with LVLs, and then put it all back down.
Yeah.
Which
on the
would be
right-hand
relatively
side of that
expensive, but then
photo,
it still doesn't solve the bridging and bracing problem.
right, the right-hand side of that where you've got your blocking in the way, that one looks like it would be pretty easily done, and that you could create the pocket necessary for the a hand to get in there. The left-hand side one is going to be a little bit more difficult, that you're right underneath the truss there. And
Well, even the right-hand side, I mean, you don't see the other bridging and bracing that was put in there. It does show up on the detail. So if I cut out a 10-inch by, say, 14-inch square, so they could get the clearances, it's going to cut out that blocking and the bracing. And then I've got to try to figure out how to get it back in there, and then try to figure out how to resupport the top of this rail.
okay,
I
I
almost
lost
build it back down
connection
again
for a
to
moment
support the
here.
rail.
Scott, you froze.
Yes, I'm frozen. I'm working on it. Okay, I'm back. You were going to explain something to me about this photo regarding the bridging and blocking, and that's when I froze.
Yeah, on the right-hand side, that rail comes up right under a truss,
Yep.
which is the modified connector that I had to provide. So to create that box in there, I would have to cut out that blocking and the bridging on top of it and the bracing on top of that. And that shows up in my last one of my details.
Yeah. Any other questions for either party?
Yes, I have one more quick question.
Mr. Feller.
Is there another elevator in this building?
No. This elevator was added as a voluntary upgrade. But yeah, this building has never had an elevator until we added this.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Mr. Straight, you're thinking hard.
No other questions here.
Okay. We'll close presentation time. Would everybody like a short break to stretch their legs and stretch their minds? I could use one.
5 minutes?
Sure.
5? Well, let's make it 7. That'll put us at 7:35. Gives us a nice round number.
All right.
Sound good?
Sounds good. See you in 7 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Get out of your way here.
I'm gonna go close up shop over there. Okay. I think I know why it didn't work. At least part of it.
Okay. Did you try to call? No. Okay, somebody called here twice. I wonder if that was my fault. No, they're deliberating right now, so. Yeah. I generated most of it. But yeah, he had a packet too. Oh yeah, I've read it several times. We're pretty much done with it except for the, they're gonna deliberate in the night. Probably I'll be home in a half hour. Okay, bye.
All right, we're still going at it. Sorry. Yeah, they just took a break now.
I can't be on this one. That's part of the problem. I need to download my list.
That's the stairway.
Yeah, I saw one before they had the biscuit.
Yeah, he was spraying the handrails, I think is what he was doing. That's up in the top of the shack. I don't know what all that is. That might have been temporary power that they had up there or something.
So where's this top plate thing?
This is it right here. That's the safety beam. And this is it right here. And then the rails run up, or that's the rail, the wheels run up and down on there.
Oh.
I got a lot more pictures if you want to look at them. I
Wondering-
didn't want to show them that one because I don't know what it is.
I'm wondering if we, for a safety thing, if you had something like a Venetian blind, so that a folding piece of metal, or, like you said, like chainmail or something that,
Yeah, but then it has to be non-combustible.
well, it could be
Yeah.
chainmail.
Yeah, I was thinking plastic netting, but
Yes, but it could be,
I lost track of time. I don't know what time they cut it off. Did you notice?
I think these are pretty close to be about 2 more minutes. But you know what chainmail is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a curtain of that.
It'd have to be kind of stapled to the lid,
Top,
and then
yeah.
if they got caught up in something, it would just rip it off.
How could it get caught up?
Well, I don't know. Things moving up and down. You wouldn't want it to be there so hard that it wouldn't be able to pull it off. I got caught up on somebody's clothing or something.
Yeah.
They're dangerous. I was looking at all the wheels and the crash they had.
Yeah. This is just one of them.
Yeah, this is a minor one to me.
Yeah. Like Troy's question here, how often does it happen?
But it hasn't happened in a long time, although I know when I was on the board, we had a couple of people killed in elevators. There was a lady killed in that elevator in the Penny's parking garage.
Oh, yeah, but she was trying to get on the car, wasn't it?
The door closed on her and the
Yeah.
elevator moved. And,
Yeah.
and I think it had killed somebody else pretty soon after that.
There was that same elevator. I think there was something going on, or there was a shooting or something that happened around there.
Yeah, it was in the same part of town. Was it the same elevator? I don't know.
So they had a drawing we never saw. Get the keys back.
I got it.
Keys? Okay, I need to use them again.
You're muted, Scott.
Yeah, I sure was. And I was having a nice conversation with myself. Call it back to order.
You guys have reshuffled on my screen.
Yep, we do that. So testimony is over and it goes to the panel now to start with, first thing to do is to entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay,
A motion that the appeal be granted with the understanding that safety signage would be posted to address the hazard.
I'll second that.
moved and seconded. That's straight. Okay. Discussions.
Well, I'll speak to my motion. You know, these codes are written for new construction. This was a retrofit. And, you know, and things were missed, and I see why they were missed. I mean, the shop drawing showed 12 foot to the bottom of the safety beam, and the designer said, well, let's make it a removable safety beam and then we're good to go. that turned out not to be the case, and now we are where we are. And, to fix the problem at this point by other means is going to be very expensive. I mean, this building was just re-roofed 3 years ago. We don't want to be tearing off the roof, and there's drainage problems, and there's the structural problems that the designer has pointed out that you don't want to make worse. And, so mistakes were made. We are where we are. It's going to be difficult to fix it to meet, the code intent. So let's be reasonable about this. There's a lot that would have to happen for someone to get something crushed in this condition. We've got a letter from an expert, Mike Liebing, saying that it couldn't, if you're controlling the cab from the top of the cab, it couldn't happen because you're going to stop 2 feet short of the top if you're controlling the car from the top of the cab. So it's going to take someone controlling the cab from outside and, running this thing all the way up, and having someone be careless enough to have their arm sitting on top of one of these power heads. And, as the designer pointed out, there's lots of other hazards in this space. It's a hazardous space. And, so yeah, we've got a problem. Let's, to me, a very reasonable way to address it is just to put some signage, and, I don't want us to determine what that is. I have every confidence that the designers and the owner will put adequate signage there to make it safe. I think there's lots of ways to do it. Let's see, I've got some notes here. I don't know if I just covered everything. I think we've got a letter from the owner saying he doesn't think it's a safety hazard. I guess the other thing is, this is a voluntary upgrade, and that's why I asked the question, is there another elevator in the building? Well, there's not. So, this is like one of those things to me, it's like, oh, is this like, no good deed goes unpunished. This owner has decided to, invest some money in this building to make it safer for handicapped people to, get up to the second floor. And it's a voluntary upgrade, and it sounds to me like the designer kind of got taken to the woodshed on the initial permit. He had to go through a lot of gymnastics to get the structural portion approved, and did that, and and now here we are. Oh, we find out we got a problem. We've got a we're it should be 4 inches. It's 1 1/4 inches, so we're 2 3/4 inches off. And now here's, development services trying, saying, you've got a problem and you've got to fix it. And the fix is going to be very expensive. And I mean, if I was an owner, I'd just be throwing up my hands and saying, geez, I should have never started this thing. I was trying to do a good thing, and now I'm just being punished for it. And I think there's an easy, safe fix. Like I just discussed. So that's all I'll say for now.
Mr. Strait, would you like to comment?
Yes. Unfortunately, I will not be able to support the motion, having seconded it. I'm going to have to agree with the administration on this. The reasoning for that is a couple of reasons. For one, as engineers, I feel one of our primary responsibilities is safety, and the absolute best way to assure safety is to engineer out the hazard. That way it can never become a hazard. We work down from there to management solutions, and which would be signage and then PPE. Signage can come and go over time. This elevator is going to be in this building for the rest of its life. Who knows how well it'll be maintained, if that signage could be taken out one day because it's causing problems, because the chain link caught on something. We have no way of knowing that that'll stay there. So engineering out the hazard is always the best way to go. I don't feel that the appellant fully has a good case that there's a conflict between the codes. As was mentioned, the codes were adopted through the Muni at the time, and through local amendment, the 2016 version of the code was required. the 2016 version of the ASME code, which does clearly have this requirement of 4 inches. The other point from the appellant is that it's difficult. Unfortunately, I agree, but I don't think we can waive safety. We can't waive code requirements because it's difficult. If we start down that road, we can never really get anywhere. So I feel for you. I feel that this is a situation where you've really been let down by your vendor, and I would have a talk with them. But I cannot support this because I feel it would put anyone who is using this, anyone who's maintaining this elevator in the future at risk. So I will not be supporting the motion.
A question for you, Mr. Straight. If we had some other barrier around that, say a 42-inch coiled wire fabric chain around that, would that change your position at all?
It would not. Reasoning for that is that, as I mentioned, that's an administrative safety mechanism. It's great on day one after construction, but 10 years from now, is that still going to be there? 10 years from now, is there going to be any signage or will it have been painted over? There's no way we can know for sure. The only way we can know for sure is to engineer out the hazard. That would be to fulfill the requirement for the 4 inches.
Me personally, I'm not fond of it as signage only. I don't think the risk is huge, but the risk is there. Even one accident is one accident too many, but I think that there's a way that this could be dealt with in alternate means and methods to give some warning that I think there's a way to do it without destroying the plywood diaphragm. I'm convinced of that. It may not be an easy way, but there's a way of doing it. I feel a lot more comfortable if there was like this safety chain around it that gave that warning with plenty of warning. You know, that's why I'm saying it would hang down 40 some odd inches to kind of flag it a little bit that there's an issue coming. And at that point, I mean, that would be a pile of material hanging up on your arm before you get to a crush point. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I did send the two of you, Troy and Sterling, an email of a link of something that popped into my head. And I don't like to get into design solutions necessarily, but I think it's something that turns my opinion on a way to fix this unfortunate situation. I agree it's a very unfortunate situation to have gotten into. I am concerned about the pinch. I don't want to just, make it go away, but I'm thinking that there's an alternate means in some fashion that could be addressed to provide warning so we don't have a problem. Other discussion?
As the owner's rep, can I interject or am I out of it at this point?
Technically not, unless a member asks you for your opinion or something.
Okay.
I guess based on the comments that have been made in our discussion, maybe I would amend my motion to say, instead of signage, say if safety measures were implemented to mitigate the hazard. Because I agree, Sterling's got a good point. Signage might not be adequate. It can be painted over. So I would just, I don't think that don't think we need to discuss amongst the three of us and figure out what those safety measures are. I feel confident that there can be adequate safety measures implemented that would mitigate the risk. So I would amend my motion to say safety measures instead of signage. And you know, I realize that's not going to sway Sterling's opinion, and you know, and I hear what he's saying. Do it the right way, engineer it out, and that's great if money's no option, but or if money's no object, but money is an object. And if we make this so expensive, the owner might say, I mean, you know, forget it, I'm not going to do it. Okay, so then you've got handicapped people trying to get to the second floor, and that's a safety hazard too. I mean, I realize the elevator's already there. They're not going to abandon this project, but you get the idea.
Is the alteration to the motion acceptable to the second?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got an amended motion then on the floor. Other discussion?
Scott, this is Gary. Can I speak to point of order at all? Am I allowed to do that?
Technically, no, unless one of the members of the committee calls for you. Yes.
Okay, I'm just thinking, you know, you're going to create a problem, I think, by going the direction you are, because it's not within the purview of the board to make. You're supposed to appeal on the, make a decision on the appeal, not come up with a solution.
Right.
To, and that's, I'm just, you know, I've been to a lot of these as you have as well, and I'm just, I think that you really have to look at what's the appeal and decide on the appeal. And if I may speak for the department, we would entertain an alteration or an alternative, but nothing's been submitted. That's all.
Thank you very much for that clarification on our charge here. I think that's important to understand. We've got to act on the motion as presented, or on the appeal as presented. As presented, yes. Other discussion? Call for vote.
Sorry, to clarify, are we changing anything in response to Gary's comment, or are we sticking with trying to provide direction?
Well, let's go back there.
Okay, so I do have a question for Mr. Franklin then. If the way I see this thing going is if we don't grant the appeal, then he's got to reappeal, but make it different and propose a solution. So Mr. Franklin, let me ask the question. At what stage is this project in? And if this whole thing got delayed another month because you had to reappeal with a solution to the hazard, is that going to be a problem?
No, I don't think it's a problem. I think, you know, hopefully we can come to some, maybe a preliminary solution, but you know, obviously the owner's more than willing to do almost anything before they pull that roof. They can afford to do a lot. Signage is easy. We can paint the top of it yellow with black stripes indicating hazard. We could put hazard signage right on the head, and we could hang some kind of maybe it's a chain mail type cone or something coming down that somebody would touch. But I mean, obviously, we're willing to put together a package and submit it back. I mean, if you could pass the appeal with that understanding, I mean, that would save a lot of time and messing around, but that's kind of my position on it, I think.
Okay, thank you. and that was my idea, is let's pass the appeal with that understanding. But I'm now seeing maybe it's not quite that easy. I mean, I think it should be. I think it's a pretty easy solution, so I'm still going to be voting to support my my motion. I don't think we need to make it that difficult, but I do understand the other concerns that have been raised with that approach.
Procedural question for you, Gary. Do we have to vote on the motion or the appeal as presented, or does the board have the ability to create an avenue for some kind of alternate means and methods for consideration?
My experience, Scott, has been that you have to just vote on the appeal. You as the board can make a recommendation to the appellant. And, and me speaking as the department, for the department, my recommendation would be to submit an alternate materials and methods. They did not do that. They just requested a modification due to a conflict. Well, there was nothing behind it. At the end of the day, all it really was a request to waive the code. There was no solution provided for us to even entertain. So that we couldn't approve waiving the code. The building official does not have that authority to waive the code. They could do potential modification, but not waive the code. That would have to be something that would be equal or greater to, just like, but it's not. I mean, if you don't have the 4 inches without any other type of solution, then it's waiving the code, and we don't have the authority to do that. And I don't think the state would appreciate that either. They would, potentially step in. So, my recommendation is, for you guys to do, I think what, the rules say, you rule on what the appeal is. You just look at what the appeal is, and you rule on it, and then you can make a recommendation. And then, I can feel confident that we would always entertain requests for alternate materials and methods, but nothing was ever provided.
Okay, I understand. So municipality's recommendation is to vote on the appeal as presented.
Well, it's a recommendation. I think it's the requirement,
yeah,
of the rules of the board.
Without the stipulations that we've put into the amendment.
I honestly don't think it falls within the purview of the board to do that. I think you can just do it as a recommendation, but you can't. I don't believe you can approve the appeal with conditions. Either you approve it or you don't. That's, my experience, and you've been on a lot of these too, Scott, over the years, and I have as well over 30 years. But that's typically how it's.
I'm trying to think of if we've ever done it where we've done it with conditions.
Victor Fosberg has his hand up. Scott.
Okay, yes, he does. Mr. Fosberg.
Just a little more color on this, Gary. I don't believe if it was just rejected, if they did then present an alternate means, it doesn't have to go before the board. It goes through the normal process back to for review and the building official to decide. So just because this is rejected, it's on this case, on this point alone,
correct,
not for the alternate means. So they could, without having to go to board again, submit different alternate means. And then if those were all rejected, then they would go to the board again, correct?
That's correct. If they're not happy with the result.
Right.
They have another opportunity to appeal.
And the only reason I brought that up is because I thought I heard a reference of that, then it would have to be, that the board would have to review the alternate means, but I don't think that would be the process.
Right, no. And
that would be worst case.
I heard that too, and I had a little concern about that as well.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for procedural clarifications.
Well, we just want to get it right, so we don't have to, drag it on, from our side,
For a pedantic point, while we've been discussing, I looked up our statute, 2310 10343, that talks about our limitations of authority for doing reviews. And we're looking at interpretations, and it specifically says building board, including 3-member panels, shall have no authority to waive requirements of this code. So if it comes down to what does the code say, that's what we're deciding, not how to do an alternate means or methods. And based on that, it reinforces my opinion that we should not be accepting this appeal, because as written in the code, it is very clearly the requirement by our mandate. We can't waive that requirement.
I'm cheating here.
This is for modification. Any other discussion?
Well, so I guess my motion is not acceptable the way that I made it. So I guess I need to revoke my motion.
Revoke and restate.
And I mean, yeah, so I make a motion that the appeal be accepted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Additional discussion.
So with I think with what was just discussed, and with the appellant kind of understanding maybe what needs to happen going forward, I will not be supporting my motion.
Additional discussion.
No further comments here.
Call for vote. Tana, we're gonna do it by call, or are we gonna do it by raise of hand?
Let's do it by call.
Okay.
Mr. Straight,
No, negative.
Mr. Feller,
No.
Mr. Boney.
No.
That is 3 no's and 0 yays.
With that, we need findings of facts in case of law.
You can state that, or you can also put in which has happened, recommendations for the appellant to get back with the muni and work something out.
I think that's my recommendation, is that there's a solution out there that needs to be discussed and found that is reasonable to provide some kind of care and warning without there's a solution there that can be found that's mutually acceptable to both parties. I'll just stop there.
Yeah, I would reiterate that. I mean, yeah, it is unfortunate, but I don't think no one intended to do this, and I don't think anyone really dropped the ball on this too bad. It was just some misunderstanding between the designer and what was required for clearances. And I would just encourage development services to please work with this appellant to come to if he does submit for alternate means, please be receptive to that and work with this appellant to arrive at a reasonable solution. And reasonable is not tearing off this roof that was done 4 years ago that's going to be, tens of thousands of dollars to, punish this owner that's doing a voluntary upgrade. Let's be reasonable and come up and maybe implement one of these solutions that we've kind of discussed. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Any additional comment from Mr. Straight?
I agree with Mr. Fowler. There's in engineering, there's always a solution, and it's not always the brute force pull off the roof and replace. So
I concur with that.
Look at options. There's something here.
I do have to make everybody aware that this is a decision of a 3-member board, and either party has the ability to appeal back to the full building board if so desired. So there is that avenue ahead, but hopefully that the parties can meet together and come up with some amicable solution. Is that it for member comments? Anything else to add on?
As the appellant, I'd just like to thank you for your time. I think our direction is clear. We will proceed.
I thank you all for your time. You put a lot of thought into this. The packets were quite informative. My questions were well answered, and I appreciate everybody's time on this presentation.
And I learned a lot about elevators that I didn't know, so thank you for that.
Now it's time for the quiz. What's that little thing on top called? What kind of plate?
It's either a platen
The
plate
Duma
or
floppy.
There you go.
drive head, or no, what was the other term?
Top head was the term I
top
heard in
head.
the field.
Okay.
It's either a top head or a platen plate.
Depends if you're East Coast or West Coast.
Hellman's or Best Foods, huh?
With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
We stand adjourned. Jalen, if you can hang on for just a moment, I got an unrelated issue to talk to you about.
Okay.
Other than it's not on this appeal, but it is regarding elevators. So.
Okay.
Well, thank you,
He
gentlemen.
is on
for your
overtime.
service. Yeah, he's yeah.
And he's on my computer, so,
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. We'll talk
It's a
to you
2-minute
Yeah.
quest.
thank you.
appreciate your service, guys.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
Have a
very
good evening.
much, everybody. Take care. Good luck.
There we go.
You closed out each one individually.